to make it clear to y'all who are watching that I am quite fond of Clorinde. I lost 50-50 to C3D look on Xiao's banner, and as unfortunate as that is, I view this as the Wine Tycoon's way of rolling out the red carpet for the most illustrious champion duelist to stride menacingly into my account. Basically, yes, I'm saving my guarantee for her and will judiciously prepare all the materials needed to level her up to max ascension on day 1. And that's because Clorinde is a lot of things. Competent, level-headed, strong-willed, reliable, helpful, just, and sensitive at times. Plus, on top of all that, she is incredibly badass with both her sword and her gun, which both crackle with a purplish glow. What's not to love about her, right? The reason why my video title kinda sounds like lore doom posting, proving that yes, it's not only meta slaves who can doom post, is not because I think Clorinde's character is lacking in and of itself, but because her characteristics and circumstances in life lead me to have very high expectations for how hoyoverse should handle her story. The problem is, I'm not purely confident that the writers will be able to touch on those points of depth that I expect from her storyline due to reasons I will explain in a bit. Once again, don't worry because these comments will be coming from a place of love for her character. Like, don't take the doom posting thing too seriously. If you find yourselves to be interested in character analysis, I hope you could consider subscribing to the channel to catch future content like this. Before explaining what I'm worried about regarding hoyoverse's handling of Clorinde's character, I first have to expound on the sources of my high expectations for her. For one, she provides a great insight into a unique part of Fontaine's justice system that we don't usually find in real life, and that's the option to duel to prove your honor. Because it's a rather strange setup that we're not used to in real life, the burden of her character is to thoroughly introduce us to that world and provide us with insights about how this could uphold justice but at the same time contribute to certain injustices as well, as we have seen with the case of Kalas. So, in some sense, her job carries a major moral burden where dueling promotes the right to choose, but at the cost of the physical health of these criminals who enter duels. Of course, it's not Clorinde's job to care about the bigger picture with the legal systems and the stipulation of rights and things like that, but I would imagine that her line of work as a champion duelist would weigh on her a bit sometimes. Basically, I think her story could really touch on what it feels like to be a cog in a potentially broken system, including how to cope with it, how to find a sense of purpose, and how to be kind to oneself despite knowing that carrying out your duty can lead to dire consequences. We have seen many characters face moral dilemmas or engage in morally dubious activities in their line of work, such as those engaging in vigilantism or, the Fatui who serve the Tsaritsa based on good intentions but reach their goals through morally reprehensible means. However, we usually have the sense that they've already accepted and embraced that what they're doing is morally dubious, but uphold a sort of alternative sense of justice instead. The issue with serving as a champion duelist is that you're in this mindset that what you're doing is perfectly legal and serves as a valid alternative to court trials, except that your methods are violent. I mean, Clorinde is basically a prosecutor with a sword. Although you could argue that the people that these duelists fight are consenting individuals, not everything people consent to is good for them. Plus, that's an ideal scenario, assuming the defendant doesn't feel pressured to enter the duel due to blackmail, or maybe even a fear of meeting their fellow conspirators in the fortress of Meripede who might threaten them. Plus other similar reasons along those lines. As I said earlier, Kalas is a prime example, but I don't think he's the only defendant who fits this sort of profile. In cases like this, the duel ends up getting in the way of true justice, wherein the truth of the matter could have been discerned in court. For these reasons, the concept of dueling brings to light lots of complex social and moral issues that are worth considering in the game to make the players really think deeply about procedural justice in relation to human rights. And as for Clorinde's character herself, exploring these struggles will give us a better insight into her true self and how she overcomes her sense of guilt surrounding her role in society. So now you may be wondering, this seems very interesting, so why are you doubting hoyoverse's ability to handle the subject matter properly? Well, the reason can be boiled down to two words: Kujou Sara. So, what does the Tengu general of the shogunate have to do with Clorinde? On the surface, they have similar roles when it comes to loyally serving their archons as part of the central government, aligning with law enforcement. They're both duelists, and they retain some level of guilt over their past actions despite believing that they also made the correct decision. Basically, they both have that theme of being a cog in a broken system. Not to say that Clorinde is a carbon copy of Kujou Sara, I'll go through their differences later, but the way Sara's story was handled may help us predict how hoyoverse will tackle Clorinde in the near future. I wouldn't say that Sara's arc was handled so horribly. The Archon quest did manage to showcase her standing up for what's right by reprimanding her abusive subordinates and confronting the head of the Kujou clan. She even rushed to Tenshukaku afterwards, then fainted. These writers seem to care so little for her that they didn't even bother to show her recovering within the same Archon quest. Another good moment was a scene in the Irodori festival where she shared a conversation with Kazuha, clearly showing her guilt over her conduct during the Vision Hunt decree, which affected him directly, and him reassuring her of her integrity and requesting that she donate his remaining belongings to the needy. That short conversation was a good way of showing her willingness to own up to her mistakes and her process of atonement by handling Kazuha's family's property according to his request. However, that was still just one scene, and I feel like the game has yet to thoroughly discuss the systemic issues within the Tenryou Commission with all the corruption and oppression going on. I mean, Hazel uncovered a murder by a Tenryou Commission official, and we didn't really get Sara's detailed opinion on this. In general, Sara lacks so much content, like she hardly appears in anything, and when she does, she's often relegated to expressing how much she worships the Raiden Shogun, making fans remember her as nothing more than a Shogun simp, as they call it. I think part of the reason for this is that the writers seem more inclined to depict a more peaceful and politically stable Inazuma after the Vision Hunt and Sakoku decrees were abolished, and they hesitate to make fans recall certain remnants of that struggle. Fontaine did a slightly better job by tackling Poisson residents' deteriorated opinion of Furina, but beyond that, there's a lack of critique regarding systemic failures of the government in addressing poverty, red tape, and other potentially harmful legal codes and procedures. Sumeru does a bit of a better job at this by constantly highlighting university struggles like research funding, the abrupt transition from Akasha reliance to old school paper, research ethics violations, and other things like that. Basically, what I'm saying is that a lack of willingness to discuss lingering governance issues within a country that has experienced a war or catastrophic event does also impact the development of some characters. They could have gone through the journey of overcoming their guilt from being complicit in harmful acts and find a renewed sense of dedication to their respective communities moving forward. But instead, this arc can end up being cut short due to the plot's denial to admit that things are still bad even after a triumphant Archon quest climax cutscene. That's not to say that Clorinde is doomed right away. She does have some things going for her that Sara didn't. She played major parts in the Archon quest, especially when it came to holding back the primordial seawater. She's more fierce in her willingness to stand up to her Archon, so at least she's not gonna become some Focalor simp or something. Her relationships with other characters seem to be more detailed, with her having close friends and colleagues that she can even banter with, while Sara does actually seem almost friendless at times, even though she's pleased by Shinobu's presence and has some humorous interactions with Ito. Her interactions with Hazel as co-workers don't feel as detailed too, so that gets in the way of better showcasing Sara's place at work. Because of Clorinde's better writing in these few areas, she might get closer to discussing the necessary issues surrounding being a duelist. But like Sara, she comes from a nation that I think Hoyoverse wants to paint as bright and happy now. Plus, she seems to be depicted as just all the time, so I don't know if the writers can even see that there's something to critique about the duel system right now. This is just to provide context as to why I'm a bit worried about Clorinde's depiction, because I have seen hoyoverse sorta give up on telling a similar story in the past, but there's still hope with her nonetheless due to her circumstances also being different in some other ways. I really hope to be proven wrong when her actual story quest and character stories come out. So with that said, what kind of story am I expecting out of Clorinde? Personally speaking, I'm hoping for some anecdotes about dealing with the family of defendants that she had dueled previously in the past. Aside from Navia, of course. This way we can see her awkwardness interacting with them, knowing that she had hurt their loved one in the name of justice, and how she plans to compensate for it even though she is technically in the right. I do know that she already experienced this arc with Navia, who was a key figure in making Clorinde feel the heavy weight of being a duelist, while also finding the courage to stand up for her childhood friend when she needed it the most. However, I have a problem with the reconciliation happening off-screen because it made the process seem easy, even though I assume that they would have had a long, insightful conversation about grief, loss, guilt, and starting anew. But I get that they couldn't really insert all of that into the Archon quest, so we just have to leave the fanfic writers to deal with this scenario, I guess. There is an opportunity for snippets of this off-screen conversation to be detailed within her character stories, but if they want to explore a similar sort of arc for Clorinde's story quest, then I would really appreciate it. But I have a bad feeling that it's just going to be another investigative case where she gets to be all badass and discover an ominous synth dealer or something similar. Not that this sort of plot is bad, but it does follow somewhat repetitive story beats as other story quests, since most of them have investigative arcs already. That's why I really hope for a more reflection-based story quest where she can also investigate a previous opponent while sorting out her feelings about fighting them before. Something that will give her a scene similar to Neuvillette visiting Callus's grave and making the rain pour with his feelings of regret. I would think Clorinde would be equally hurt by some failures to bring forth justice as much as Neuvillette was. I hope that the game would also be able to admit that to some degree, Clorinde's job can be quite traumatic to her own self, as she has to constantly inflict harm on other people, even if it's consensual, and also reconcile that concept with justice. Because even if you know you're doing the right thing, you can still feel guilty about the consequences. And we have seen that with the way she followed Navia around to protect her as a way of assuaging her own guilt surrounding killing her best friend's father. But I doubt that it's a one-off because her job puts her in that constant state of bloodshed, and I don't think she has developed a sort of excitement for it like Child does, you know. Even if the defendants are indeed horrible people, I don't know if Clorinde feels vindicated when winning in duels against them, because there's always this idea that this person could have gone to court and received a sentence that they deserved, which could have made them suffer less. Knowing about that alternate reality is where I think the burden of dueling lies. Again, it's easy to rationalize saying that the opponent chose to duel, but still, it can be hard to stomach constantly doing this unless you have developed a gut of steel, which I think Clorinde has, but that doesn't completely negate the trauma either. I do think she has worked on it, similar to how doctors have come to terms with patients dying, but I believe there's room for her to continue healing by gaining new perspectives or new sources of comfort as much as possible. To put into perspective just how bad her job feels, let's look at the people around her. Chevreuse apprehends criminals to ensure that they face the consequences for their actions. Neuvillette gives fair sentences in court to uphold the law and ensure order persists in Fontaine. Then Risley rehabilitates the criminals by helping them live a new life while atoning for their sins. Then to top that off, Navia practically runs a non-profit organization and she cares for the people and people love her. Clorinde does also uphold justice, but it's not through means that are grand or heroic on the surface, at least in my opinion. Her way of upholding justice involves more dirty work in a sense, which is necessary, but as I said, it could possibly weigh on her, even though other people can have the option of pursuing justice in a way that more or less feels good to them. So it seems like she can't even take pleasure from her job if you put it that extremely. Like she can feel honored to be a duelist, but I don't know if fulfilling is the right term for it. Because of that, I would be very interested to see how Clorinde views her identity in relation to her job, as in how strongly she identifies with it or how she understands her sense of purpose. Her constellation is apparently Rapperia, which means rapier, aka sword, thus centering her identity on being a duelist. Part of that could come from her natural talent and her passion for the sword arts, plus how she feels she can contribute to society using her natural talents. Although I did paint dueling as a stressful job, there are some other parts of her role that aren't as emotionally burdensome, such as her being tasked to guard Furina before, coordinate Gardemek logistics, serve as an envoy to the fortress of Meropide, and assist in Poson's rehabilitation efforts. I'm not sure if these things are necessarily part of most duelists' job description, or if it's something added on top of the role. Still, she can find more fulfillment in these aspects of her work, even though dueling may take an emotional toll on her. Of course, as I said, she has likely found the right coping strategies to deal with becoming a duelist and is able to focus on the good she brings to society rather than dwelling on cases when she kills someone's dad because he asked her to. Perhaps she also finds ways to view herself as someone beyond only being a duelist through other hobbies as well. Or maybe she still duels casually or trains others to duel so that she won't be burnt out by her own talents. I think she must be doing well currently despite the possible trauma associated with her job, and that healing process is worth depicting, especially for audiences who might relate to the feeling of processing, letting go of, and overcoming guilt, or those who need advice to begin this journey. Essentially, I want the game to show us what dueling means to her aside from the value ascribed to her profession by society, and that would be really important to understanding the core motivations of Clorinde's character. On the bright side, I think that Clorinde's success as a champion duelist has led to some pretty positive results for Fontaine aside from her prosecuting defendants with her sword. Her drip marketing has hinted at criminals being dissuaded from engaging in a duel if they know that they'll be matched up against her, so in some way her reputation is enough to possibly persuade criminals to pursue a court case instead of a duel and accept their fate at the fortress of Meropide. By extension, she may also possibly reduce the crime rate by a teeny tiny bit. At this point, she might not need to duel many people anymore, and she might often be left only to fight with the genuine assholes, since some people with lighter crimes will just resort to being sentenced by Neuvillette. However, again, I do hope that we get to see how she feels about herself beyond the reputation people have of her, because reputations can also be rather shallow as well. Still, the fear she instills in evildoers is very beneficial to society, it seems, so at least that's something that can comfort her when she feels a bit bad about herself. Okay, so clearly I am not actually doom posting Clorinde's lore. I think she's gonna be a great character already because of the foundations of her character being laid out to us in previously released content, so regardless of what direction hoyoverse chooses to write her, she'll still be quite good. Still, it would be a huge waste of potential if the writers didn't get to explore her struggles in depth and opt to show her as completely badass instead, with no sense of vulnerability. Not that I want her to have this soft woo moments for the forest gap mower, but I want her to display a good balance between strength and vulnerability, strong will and understanding, ferocity and compassion, and all these complex things that make up a rather unique character. Of course, if hoyoverse so happened to make her character flat, the fans could just fill in the blanks with analysis and fan works about her, but if canon doesn't give enough juicy details, then it's also easy to suffer from a lack of inspiration. That's why I really hope the writers handle Clorinde well, because I believe she can be a source of lots of important insights for real life that will resonate deeply with players if her inner world gets thoroughly explored. So, are you looking forward to pulling Clorinde in 4.7? What else are you expecting from the font and storyline? If you found this video interesting, why not consider subscribing to the channel to keep up with my videos? That's enough rambling for now, and I'll catch you in the next one.